And welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture on Elastic File System, we'll explore EFS as an option for Amazon EC2, or as a storage option for Amazon EC2. We'll create an EFS share and EFS mount points in multiple availability zones, and we'll then create an EC2 instance and mount the EFS share using the Linux operating system of that EC2 instance through an EFS mount point. So we're going to create an EFS share in the US East 1 region, and we're going to use the default VPC simply because it's already got subnets created within all the availability zones, and it's going to make life a little bit easier for us. So we can see there we've got our multiple availability zones for that US East 1 region, and what we're going to do is that we're going to create mount targets for each one of those subnets, and you cannot create a mount target unless there is a subnet inside the availability zone. And then we're going to use one of those availability zones, one of those subnets within that availability zone, to launch an EC2 instance into, and we're going to connect into that instance and mount that EFS mount target to that EC2 instance using the Linux operating system. Okay, so I'm just here in the EFS console. If you haven't created an Elastic file system before, you'll be presented with this welcome screen. So we're just going to click on Create File System, and we select the VPC that we're going to be putting our mount points into. So I've only got the default VPC on this account, so we'll leave it at that. Now what it will do is it will create mount targets for us. Now, mount targets need to be located in a VPC subnet. If you don't have any subnets in the availability zone, then you won't be able to create a mount target for that availability zone. So here, because I'm using the default VPC, which has subnets in each availability zone, we have an option there that we can select to create a mount point in that availability zone. But if we didn't have, for example, here, if we didn't have a subnet in US East 1D, that option to create a mount point in US East 1D would not be available for us. Then we have our security groups that will be associated with this mount target. So I'm just going to leave it for now with the default security, or the default VPC security groups that are being auto-populated there for me, but we will change that later on to add our security group that is associated with our EC2 instance that we're going to create later. So I'll just click on the next step, and we'll just give this a name. That will do. And we're just going to use general purpose default setting for performance mode. And next step. So now we've just got to review it and create our file system. So we can see there we've got our default VPC that it's going to be associated with. And we have our mount points there for each one of the availability zones of that default VPC. And the security group will be the default VPC security group that the mount points will be associated with. And we've got our name tag there, of course. So we'll create file system. So after a certain amount of time, we're going to get this up, and what it will be doing is it will have its lifecycle state as being creating. So we need to allow a few minutes for that to go from creating to available, and then we can go on and create our EC2 instance and start mounting this using that mount point. So after a few minutes, we'll see that the lifecycle state will change to available. You just need to click on refresh up here and refresh it if it doesn't come up after a certain amount of time. And so that is our Elastic file system set up. Our EFS share has been set up. So what we need to do now is to go into the EC2 service and create our EC2 instance and launch it in one of these availability zones. So we'll launch an instance. We're just going to use the Amazon Linux AMI. We'll just use the T2 micro, and we'll make sure that we have a public IP address, and we don't need to add storage. Add tags. So I'm just going to add a name tag for this, and we're going to call it EFS test. That'll do. Okay, so now we need to create a security group. So I'm just going to give this a name, EFS test, or EFS security group maybe. That will do, EFS security group. So two things that we need for this security group is we need to be able to connect into it, to have SSH into it on port 22, which we've got there. We also need to, later on, after we've created this, to add a rule that will allow NFS inbound for our EFS share. So we're not going to do that now. I'll do that after I've created the EC2 instance. So we'll just click on Review and Launch. And launch. We'll use a key pair that we've used before. So there's our instance all happening. So what I'm going to do is go into this EFS security group that we created before, and I'm going to copy its ID. And I'm going to jump back into the EFS console, and I'm going to modify our file system access. So I'm going to modify this mount target, and we need to have access for that for our security group. So you're just going to click on here, Manage File System Access, or I can go up to here and Manage File System Access. And what I'm going to do is add to US East 1A the security group for our EC2 instance, which is here, EFS-SG. So it's always good practice to make sure that you put that security group in all of your availability zones, which is what I'm just going to do now. So just going to select that in there for each availability zone. And save that. And there we can see all of the availability zones are set up to use that EFS security group, or are associated with that EFS security group. So the next thing we need to do is to allow inbound access to our EC2 instance from our EFS share. Otherwise we're not going to be able to mount that. So we go into security group here, we select our EC2 instance, we go to the security group for that and click on it, and then we can add an inbound rule for that. So just add another inbound rule, so add, which will be a NFS, and that will be custom with our security group, so it'll be SG and that security group that we used before. And if we save that, that will be all we need to do from a security perspective to allow us to mount the EFS share on our EC2 instance. So we've associated the EC2 security group with our EFS share, and we've also done the same for the EC2 instance as well, to associate the EFS share to that as well. So what we need to do now is to connect into this EC2 instance and mount our EFS mount target. So before we start connecting into our instance, just want to jump back into the EFS console again, and if we look at our file system here, we can see that we have mount instructions for EC2. So we'll just click on that, and what that does, it saves us a fair bit of time here. So we just don't need to worry about this setting up your EC2 instance. We've already done that. Now there is an instruction here to do a sudo yum install of the NFS client. So because we're using the Amazon Linux AMI, we don't need to worry about that. It already comes pre-installed with the NFS client on it. So ignore that. So all this first setting up EC2 instance has already been done. So the only thing we need to do now is to mount our file system. So we need to make a directory for our mount point. So we create or make a directory EFS for our mount point there, and next we need to run a sudo mount command, which is quite long there, so it makes life a lot easier for us if we can just copy that. So basically what it does, it mounts that mount target and it uses the domain name for that EFS service or that EFS share, and that consists of the file system name and followed by EFS dot and then the region and then dot amazonaws.com. But again, makes life a lot easier for us now that the EFS system has created that for us or automatically. So what I'm going to do is just copy that, and I'll use that when we connect into our EC2 instance to run that mount command. Okay, so I've just connected into that EC2 instance. The first thing we need to do is we need to make a directory for our EFS, or we need to create a mount point directory for our EFS mount point. So we do sudo mkdir EFS. That's fine. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to mount our EFS mount target to that EFS mount point directory. So we copy that command that was in the EFS console and we just click enter, and that will start to happen for us. Okay, so after a certain amount of time there we can see that it has created that. So now we're going to CD into that EFS share and just do a directory on it first, and we see that it's empty. And what we'll do is we'll create a file to go in there and see if that's working. So we just do touch and then we just do a test file in there, .txt. So there we can see that we don't have permission. So there is another layer of security for us with the Unix operating system. So we can only create a file if we have root access there within our Unix file system. So again, you use chown or chmod to change permissions of that file system as you would do with any other Linux file system. This is not a course on Linux, so if you need to find out about Linux, do a course on Linux, but this is not a course on Linux and you don't really need to know Linux to pass the exam. So what I'm going to do is sudo into that and then what I'll do is save myself typing. So just do the same command as we did before, but with sudo, and so have a look at that, and we can see that that is there now. So there we've created an EFS share, we've created mount targets for that EFS share in availability zones, we've then created an EC2 instance, and we've associated the security groups between the EC2 instance and the EFS share so that they can communicate with each other. And now we have actually successfully mounted that mount target to our Linux operating system. So that's all we have to do for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.